Hello, I'm Gordon Lane, editor of DSLRtips.com. When you're taking landscape photos, it can often really add a lot of interest to your picture to have something in the foreground, like a tree or a fence, but the difficulty is getting everything in sharp focus. If your camera is set to fully automatic, you might find that either the background's sharp or the foreground, but rarely both at the same time. It is, however, possible to get both the foreground and the background in sharp focus, and in this workshop I'll show you how. When you're taking landscape photos in fully automatic, your camera generally focuses on the distant background, and that means that anything closer to the camera will appear blurred. This can be really annoying though if you've carefully included something nearby to make the composition that bit more interesting. For example, in this picture, the grassy ledge in the bottom left hand corner has come out all blurred. It's actually possible to control how much of your photo is in focus using your DSLR. You could choose to have everything from near to far in sharp focus, or perhaps just the main subject itself on a nice blurred background. To do this, you'll need to put your DSLR into aperture priority mode. This allows you to choose an aperture setting, and the camera will automatically select a shutter speed to match, so you'll have a perfect exposure. So it's still fully automatic, but it gives you the flexibility of choosing the aperture and therefore controlling how much of the photo is in focus. Here's how it works in practice. To put your DSLR into aperture priority mode, simply turn the dial at the top to the letter A. If you're using a Canon model like this DSLR, you'll need to turn the dial to the letters AV. Now you can adjust the aperture by turning a dial that will either be at the front of the camera or at the back. The actual aperture value itself will normally be labelled with a letter F, and you'll see it either on the screen at the back, through the optical viewfinder, or if your DSLR has a screen on the top, you'll also see the aperture value here. When you change the aperture setting on your DSLR, you're actually adjusting an iris that's built into the lens. Now this iris can be used to control the amount of light that passes through the lens and into the camera, but it also has an important effect on the amount of the photo that's in focus. When the iris is wide open, only the main subject will be sharp. But as you reduce the size of the iris, more and more of the photo will be in sharp focus. The aperture value that you change on your camera is known as the f number, and that stands for focal ratio. That's actually the ratio between the focal length of your lens and the diameter of the iris at its current setting. As the f number gets smaller, the iris opens up and less of your photo will be in focus. As the f number gets bigger though, the iris shrinks down and more of your photo will be in focus. So in order to get both the background and the foreground in sharp focus on a landscape shot, you'll need a sufficiently big f number. Now that particular number will depend on your lens and the actual range of distances that you'd like to be sharp, but generally speaking a setting of say f16 will have a great deal in focus. If you check the photo after you've taken it and there's still not enough in focus, try a bigger number still. Most lenses will let you go to between f22 and f30. The range of distances that will appear in sharp focus is known as the depth of field. If you have a very small depth of field, that means that only the main subject will be in focus and anything in front or behind of it will appear blurred. If you have a very large depth of field though, that means that lots in your photo will be in focus, both near and far. Now choosing a big f number is the main way to get a large depth of field, but there are other things you can do to maximise the effect. Wide-angle lenses inherently have larger depths of field, so if you're after a shot where you want absolutely loads in sharp focus, then choose a wide-angle lens, or if you have a zoom, make sure it's zoomed all the way out. So here's that landscape shot again, taken with the automatic settings, and here the camera's actually used an aperture setting of f5.6. Now since the camera was focused on the background, that's in focus, but the aperture of f5.6 hasn't provided a sufficiently large depth of field for the grassy ledge in the foreground to appear sharp. Now here's a shot taken just moments later in aperture priority mode, again focused on the distance, but this time we've manually set the aperture to f22. This has greatly increased the depth of field, and it means that we've got both the distant hills and the close grass in very sharp focus. This technique equally applies to any situation where you'd like subjects both near and far in sharp focus. In this photo of a boat, the netting in the foreground was included to try and make an attractive composition, but an insufficient depth of field means it's just not all in focus. By choosing a bigger f number in aperture priority mode though, you can have both the ropes and the boat in sharp focus. It's also worth remembering that the depth of field extends both in front and behind of the point that you focus on. So for a really massive depth of field like this shot of a field of sunflowers, try focusing your camera not on the far distance but on a point about halfway back. This will maximise your chances of getting everything both near and far in sharp focus. If you are using a big f number though, it's worth reminding yourself that the iris inside the lens will have shrunk to quite a small opening and it will be letting a lot less light into the camera. Now if your camera is set to shutter priority mode, it will automatically compensate for this by choosing a slower shutter speed. So the exposure will look absolutely fine, but it's important to remember that a slower shutter speed is more susceptible to camera shake. So if you're using a bigger f number to maximise your depth of field, just bear this in mind. If neither your camera or lens has built-in anti-shake facilities, then try and hold your camera as steadily as possible, or better still, put it on a tripod. It's also worth noting that every camera lens has a sweet spot, an aperture setting where it will perform at its best. Now for most DSLR lenses you'll get the best quality at around the f8 position, and as you choose bigger f numbers that quality will deteriorate, so it's important to only use those big f numbers when you absolutely need that maximum depth of field. It's also important to note that at this point all of your photos will be taken with big f numbers, you'll be getting a large depth of field and you'll be running the risk of camera shake on all of them, so after you've taken your big depth of field shot, always make sure you return your camera to its fully automatic settings or to the program mode indicated by the letter P. Controlling the amount in focus, or the depth of field, is an incredibly useful technique to learn, and in fact many photographers use aperture priority mode more than any other setting on their camera. It's really easy too. Just remember that if you want lots in focus on your photo, zoom out to wide angle and choose a nice big f number, something around say f16, and you should be fine. For a step-by-step guide that accompanies this video, along with many more techniques, head on over to www.dslrtips.com.